The war was over. The stars were quiet again. Spaceships had taken off, one after another, carrying soldiers, weapons, and broken dreams back to Earth. But deep in the jungle of a faraway alien planet called Virix 9, a single human stood still. Dust covered his armor. Blood, not all of it his own, had dried on his hands. He was tired, hungry, alone. His name was Mason Cade. Mason was a soldier in the 7th Earth Battalion. Brave, loyal, tough, he had fought in many battles, survived injuries, and watched many of his friends die. But he had never felt this kind of silence before. No gunfire, no commands on his radio, just wind in the tall purple trees and the distant cries of strange alien birds. He clicked his comm link again. "This is Sergeant Cade. Hello, anyone?" Static replied again. His team was gone. The last human ship had left in a rush during the final fight. No one checked if he was alive. No one looked back. He was forgotten. The planet was strange. The air was thin but breathable. The ground was wet, like walking on a sponge. Huge mushroom-like trees reached toward the sky, glowing softly at night. Small creatures watched him from behind bushes, curious but careful. Mason set up a small shelter using what little gear he had left. He had one blaster rifle, a knife, half a pack of dried rations, and a cracked tablet filled with old war logs. He studied the map, but it was useless now. The planet had no working satellites. He was completely off the grid. Every night, he made a fire and stared at the stars. Sometimes he spoke to them. "You really left me, huh?" He would whisper, just like that. On the 10th day, he found the battlefield again. Wrecked tanks, burned metal, skeletons, human and alien, all half buried in ash and dirt. He didn't want to look, but he did. Slowly, he started burying the bodies, human and Zarn alike. He didn't care who they were anymore. They were all just people who had fought and died. He dug with his hands, covered them with stones, one grave at a time. It gave him something to do, something to feel. But someone was watching. That night, as he sat near the fire, a soft sound reached his ears. A branch snapping, something moving. Mason quickly grabbed his rifle and stood up. His heart raced. He moved slowly, step by step, toward the sound. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped out. It wasn't human. It was tall, with smooth gray skin and deep green eyes that glowed. Its hands were up in peace. It wore no armor, no weapons. Mason raised his rifle. "Stop right there." The creature spoke, not in a human tongue, but its voice was calm, musical, full of emotion. Mason didn't understand the words, but the meaning felt clear. "I mean no harm." Mason didn't shoot. Over the next few days, more of these beings appeared. They called themselves the Tavari. They lived deep in the forest, peaceful, quiet, and nearly wiped out during the war. Everyone believed they were gone, but they had survived. And somehow, they thought Mason was special. The Tavari believed he was the star bringer, a figure from their old legends who would return from the sky in a time of great danger. To them, Mason was not just a soldier. He was a sign, a savior. He tried to explain, "I'm just a man, a soldier, nothing more." But they didn't listen. They watched him fix things with tools. They saw how he fought off wild beasts with fire and steel, how he never ran from danger, how he respected the dead. To them, he was a god in human skin. At first, Mason wanted nothing to do with them. He just wanted to go home. But as days turned into weeks, something began to change. The Tavari brought him food. They healed his wounds with strange glowing herbs. Their children laughed when he showed them how to build a small shelter. They didn't fear him. They trusted him. And for the first time since the war began, Mason felt human again. But peace never lasts long on Virix-9. One evening, while watching the stars from a hilltop, Mason saw something new in the sky, a red light, moving fast. Then another, not comets, not shooting stars. D or OPSHIPS. Enemy dropships. His blood ran cold. The war might have ended, but something or someone was coming back. End of part 1 cliffhanger. As the Tavari gathered around Mason, worried and afraid, he stood tall with his rifle in hand, his eyes locked on the sky. "They forgot me," he said quietly, "but I'm still here. And now, I'm ready." The sky burned red from the edge of the jungle hill. Mason Cade watched as enemy dropships came through the clouds like firebirds. With claws, They were Zarn's ships, ugly, black, and loud, with glowing green lights underneath. No one else on the planet would have recognized them, but Mason did. He had seen them too many times during the war. The Tavari villagers stood behind him, confused and scared. Their wide eyes looked to the sky, then to the human they believed in. They called him Kavasan, which in their language meant he who fell from fire. Mason didn't understand all of their words, but he understood enough. They believed in him, not as a man, not even as a soldier, but as something more, something divine. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the ships in the sky or the hope. In their eyes, 12 days earlier, after Mason spared the first Tavari scout, word spread like wildfire through the jungle. One by one, others came, old ones with walking sticks, children riding on the backs of giant feathered lizards, women with glowing crystal bracelets who sang strange songs to the trees. They didn't speak Earth's language, but they smiled. They watched him work. They brought him gifts, fruits, cloth, fire rocks, even a strange, glowing fish once. When he spoke, they listened. When he moved, they followed. Mason didn't want followers. He wanted extraction, but extraction never came. So he stayed at night. They lit fires. They painted with ashes and sang about the star bringer, a figure from their ancient stories. This being would fall from the sky during a time of great darkness. He would walk alone, holding the fire of 1,000 suns, and lead the last of the Tavari into a new dawn. To them, Mason fit the story. He was alone. He was strong. He carried fire, and above all, he protected them. When a jungle stalker beast attacked a hunting party, Mason chased it off with a homemade flamethrower. When a Tavari child fell sick from poisoned water, Mason boiled the stream, purified it with his army tablets, and stayed up all night at her side. He taught them how to build walls. He showed them how to track enemies using footprints and broken branches. He helped them bury their dead, and slowly, without meaning to, he became part of their world. But he never forgot what he was. He was the forgotten soldier. Now, standing beneath that blood-red sky, Mason watched death fly toward them once again. The first Zarn ship landed a few miles out. Smoke rose in the distance, trees cracked and fell, jungle birds screamed and scattered. The Tavari began to panic, shouting in their language, hurrying their children indoors. Mason stayed still. He didn't blink. Then, with calm and strength, he turned to them. We need to prepare, now. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone and the look in his eyes. They nodded. That night, Mason worked without sleep. He pulled out his last remaining Earth tech, a broken drone, a shortwave radio, and an old recon beacon with half a battery. He rigged them all together to make a motion alarm near the edge of the jungle. He drew diagrams in the dirt. He taught the Tavari how to fight, not with strength, but with speed, stealth, and smart thinking. He gave each adult a sharpened spear with heat-treated tips. He crafted fire bombs from sap and wine. He posted silent lookouts in the trees with bird call signals. And then he waited. For the first time since the war, Mason was not fighting alone. On the third night, they came. Zarn soldiers, tall, armored, machine-like. Their skin was hidden behind dark biometal. Their voices buzzed like insects. They carried plasma rifles and laser drills. They came to destroy, to finish what the war had started. But Mason was ready. The traps worked. Flaming pits swallowed soldiers. Exploding rocks blew apart scout drones. And above it all, Mason moved like a ghost. Fast, silent, and deadly. His rifle cracked fire into the dark. His blade struck with purpose. He led the Tavari not like a leader, but like a living storm. By sunrise, the jungle floor was covered in smoke and broken metal. The Tavari did not cheer. They knelt. They surrounded Mason in silence. Then one old Tavari woman, wrinkled, blind in one eye, her bones thin as paper, stepped forward and placed her hand on Mason's chest. Kevatu, Hran, she whispered. The others repeated it softly. It meant, not man, not beast, flame of the sky. And from that day forward, the Tavari stopped calling him a soldier. They called him a god. Mason hated it at first. He tried to correct them. He shouted, I'm not what you think I am. But they just smiled and bowed. Again, in their eyes, a true god wouldn't admit he was a god. That only made them believe it more. Still, Mason didn't care about titles. He cared about protecting these people. He had lost everything in the war. His unit, his home, his purpose. But now, he had a village, A mission, a new kind of war. That night, after the battle, Mason climbed to the top of the hill again. He looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth was spinning. Cities were alive. Soldiers were being honored. But no one remembered him. No one except the Tavari. He touched the strange necklace the old woman gave him, made from stone, cloth, and a single broken piece of his earth armor. In the soft glow of the alien moon, Mason whispered to himself, "They forgot me, but I will make sure this galaxy remembers them." War had changed him. Before the war, Mason Cade was just a man, a brother, a soldier who dreamed of finishing his duty and returning home. He loved old Earth books, campfires, and black coffee. He didn't want medals or fame, just peace. But peace died long ago, and now he stood at the heart of a jungle planet, covered in ash and sweat, sharpening metal scraps into weapons. His eyes were sharp, cold, focused. Round him, alien hands followed his every movement. The Tavari had no armies, no battle schools, no understanding of war. But Mason was about to teach them, because the enemy was coming in a high orbit above the planet, deep inside a shadowy ship. A Zarn war general named Skrulzek reviewed a video recording. It showed a human, dirty, bloodied, wearing scavenged armor, leading a group of primitive aliens into battle. He watched as Mason set traps, gave orders, and cut down elite Zarn scouts. With precision, Skrull's green eyes narrowed. "This human," he hissed, "is more dangerous than a fleet. He fights like an empire, alone." Another officer replied nervously. "Should we send a full assault team?" Skrull growled. "Send everything on the ground?" Mason worked day and night. He didn't rest. He couldn't. He knew how this worked. The first attack was a test. The next one would be full invasion, and this time, no one was coming to help Dot, so he became the help. He started with basics. He trained the Tavari to listen before they move, to watch before they speak, and to strike only when ready. He turned hunters into scouts. He taught them how to track using broken branches, heat trails, and sound. Their weapons were simple: spears, bows, fire. But Mason upgraded everything. He used metal shards from wrecked Zarn ships to make spearheads. He turned tree sap and spice oil into fire bombs. He found a fallen Zarn drone and used its battery core to build a long-range beacon, in case he ever got the chance to call Earth. He knew war, and he made war teachable. The villagers were scared, but they trusted him. In the evenings, Mason would sit by the fire and tell stories, not about gods or myths, but about Earth. He told them about oceans, the blue sky, and cities filled with light. He told them about laughter and family, about coffee and warm bread. The children listened with wide eyes. To the Tavari, those stories sounded like heaven. To Mason, they were a reminder of everything he had lost. Still, it gave them hope, and that mattered more now than ever. Then came the day the sky cracked open. Dozens of black Zarn ships entered the atmosphere like falling thunder. They roared like beasts, shaking the trees and splitting the sky. Villagers screamed. Tavari elders wept. But Mason stood tall. He didn't panic. He ordered the villagers into underground tunnels. He positioned warriors across the jungle. He triggered trap fields and motion sensors. He pulled out the last working rifle from his emergency cache and loaded the last 5 rounds. Then he looked to the jungle, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Let's begin." The first enemy wave came hard. Zarn soldiers dropped from the sky in armored suits, firing plasma rounds into the forest. They expected to meet weak creatures. They expected to crush resistance. What they got was hell. The first 2 squads walked into spike traps. The third triggered a fire blast, which lit the trees like torches. The fourth team was ambushed by Tavari warriors using hit-and-run tactics, fast, silent, brutal. And Mason, he was everywhere. He moved through the trees like a ghost. He slashed through armored joints with a reinforced blade. He planted explosives. He set fires. He dragged the wounded to safety. Every Tavari he saved cheered his name. Every Zarn he took down cursed to the enemy. He wasn't a man. He was a myth made real. But victory always comes at a price. In the chaos, a young Tavari boy, barely old enough to carry a weapon, ran toward Mason, crying out. Behind him, a Zarn beast creature, covered in steel armor, chased him down. Mason turned the late. The beast struck him across the chest and sent him flying into a tree. His vision blurred. His ribs screamed in pain. Blood filled his mouth. The child screamed his name, Kavasan, But Mason didn't stay down. He rose. Broken, bleeding, furious, he charged the beast, climbed its back, and drove a burning spear into its neck. It roared and collapsed. The Davari who saw it fell to their knees. Some cried. Others shouted and songed out, but Mason couldn't hear them. He was already falling. When he woke up, he was in a healing tent. A Davari elder pressed cool leaves to his wounds. Children sat near his bed, whispering prayers. He tried to sit up, but the elder stopped him. "You bleed, yet you still fight," she said in broken English. "You are not just human. You are our fire." Mason didn't answer. He didn't feel like a fire. He felt like a man on the edge of death. But the next morning, he got up anyway, because the Zarm weren't done yet. At sunset, the jungle fell silent again. The second wave had failed. But in the distance, Mason saw something worse, a cruiser-class warship the size of a small city, descending from the sky. He knew what that meant. Skrull himself was coming. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ground shook as the sky burned again. From the dark clouds above, the massive Zarm war cruiser pierced through the atmosphere like a blade. Fire streaked behind it. The forest trembled. Animals fled in every direction. Lightning flashed across the red sky, as if nature itself was afraid. The Davari villagers stood frozen. Even the bravest warriors, those who had fought beside Mason, Cade lowered their weapons in fear. They had never seen a ship that large before. It was like a floating city, a monster of steel and death, and from the center of that ship, the enemy's leader stepped out. SK or ALL single quote ZEK. He wore thick armor, like liquid metal. His face was hidden beneath a cruel silver mask. His voice boomed through the speakers of his suit, echoing across the jungle. "Bring me the human, kneel, and I may let you live." Mason stood on the edge of the tree line, watching. His body still hurt from the last battle. His ribs were wrapped in cloth. His arm was scratched and bandaged. But his eyes were fire. He didn't run. He didn't blink. Instead, he whispered under his breath, "No more hiding." He turned to the Davari behind him. Warriors, mothers, farmers, children. Many were scared, but many looked ready. Mason walked toward them slowly and picked up a stick. With it, he drew a line in the dirt. "This is where we stand," he said firmly. "This is where we say no." That night, a council was held in the great wooden hall. Elders argued. Some wanted to run. Some wanted to give up the human. "He is not one of us," they cried. "If we give him up, the sky monster will leave." But others defended him. A young warrior shouted, "He bled for us. He fought for our children. He is one of us." The room went quiet as Mason entered. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He only said one thing. "If you want peace, you must fight for it. I can't promise we will all live, but I promise this, we won't die alone." And something changed. The next day, Mason began training the Davari tribes together, not just his village, but others. From deep in the jungle, they came with fear in their eyes, but when they saw Mason, that fear became fire. He taught them how to hold a line, how to move through shadows, how to strike and disappear. He gave each warrior a task. Some built weapons, others dug tunnels or created traps. The elders worked on medicines. The children carried messages through the trees. Everyone had a role. And for the first time in generations, the Davari were not scattered tribes. They were a force. Mason also found time to build something else, a signal tower deep in the hills. Using the last working parts of a fallen satellite dish and old Zarn tech, he pieced together a machine that could send a distress call across deep space. He had only one shot. The signal was short and rough. Static broke his voice, but his message was clear. "Sergeant Mason Cade, last survivor of Virix 9, still alive. We are not alone. Civilians here, under attack. Send help." He pressed send, and then waited. But deep down, he knew Earth might never hear it. So he planned as if no one would come. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet. Mason knew the Zarm were planning something bigger. They didn't rush. They wanted fear to grow first. Skrulzik was smart. A monster, yes, but not stupid. He was giving Mason time to break. But Mason didn't break. He sharpened his blade, strengthened his walls, watched the stars. He remembered his brother's voice. His brother, who had died in the first week of the war. "Don't fight for the flag," he had once told Mason. Fight for the people standing beside you. Mason smiled. That's exactly what he was doing now. Finally, the storm came. Zarndrop pods rained down across the jungle in the dead of night. Explosions lit up the trees. War beasts were released. Giant creatures with claws like steel, roaring louder than thunder. But Mason was ready. The Tavari signal calls echoed through the trees. Kavasan leads. Kavasan fights. They ambushed the first wave in narrow mountain passes. They used fire to blind the beasts. They collapsed wooden bridges to trap heavy mechs. From tree lines, Tavari archers rained down flaming arrows. Mason led from the front, sword in one hand, blaster in the other. His armor was cracked, his hands bloodied, but he fought with the strength of 10 dot to the Tavari. It was a miracle dot to the Zarn. It was a nightmare dot in one battle. A Zarn war beast cornered a group of Tavari children near a waterfall. Mason saw it. He ran with everything he had left. He jumped from a ledge, blade first, and drove his weapon straight into the beast's neck. It collapsed, sending both Mason and the beast into the water. The Tavari children pulled him out, wet, bruised, breathing. And that day, they didn't call him God, they called him Father of the Flame. By dawn, the Zarn pulled back. They had lost hundreds. Skrull watched the reports from his command chair. He slammed his fist into the console. One human, just one. But Mason was no longer just a human. He was a symbol. He had given a broken people their fire back. He had turned fear into fury. He had taken the spark of rebellion and turned it into a wildfire. The jungle was on fire. Flames licked the sky like angry hands. The air was thick with smoke and ash. Trees snapped in half. War cries echoed from every corner. And in the heart of it all, bleeding, burnt, but still breathing, stood Mason Cade. His blaster was empty. His armor was cracked, but his eyes, still sharp, still alive. He looked up. Above him, the Zarn war cruiser floated like a black cloud of death, its engines humming, its side ports glowing green. For days, the enemy had rained down waves of terror. Still, Mason stood. Still, he fought. And far away, in a quiet part of the jungle, a miracle was happening. The signal tower Mason had built, a tower made from broken parts, dead tech, and hope, had sent its message across the stars. Now, it blinked. Then again, then once more, a red light, a reply. The screen cracked, the sound distorted, static screeched. Then, through all the noise, came a voice, human, calm, familiar. This is Earth Command. Sergeant Mason Cade, we read you. You are not alone. Help is coming. Mason didn't hear the message at first. He was still out in the jungle, leading raids, bleeding into the soil. But when the Tavari scout ran to him, carrying a hand-carved communicator, Mason stopped in his tracks. He raised the tiny speaker to his ear. The voice repeated, help is coming. His knees almost gave out. Back in the war tent, Mason stared at the glowing screen, his eyes filled with something he hadn't felt in months, hope. The Tavari surrounded him. Some touched the glowing machine in wonder, others wept. The elders lit candles and sang softly, but Mason wasn't celebrating. Not yet. They heard us, he whispered. But they're far, weeks away. We need to survive until then. The next day, the enemy changed their tactics. Skrullzek, furious at his growing losses, activated a new weapon, one not used in decades. Project Hololight. A massive AI-controlled drill emerged from the cruiser's belly. It began digging into Virix 9's core, releasing waves of sonic pulses. The forest screamed. Birds fell dead. Rivers turned black. The jungle itself began to rot. Mason watched trees he had protected die within minutes. He watched flowers he'd seen bloom curl up and burn. They're not just fighting us anymore, he said. They're destroying the planet. The Tavari looked to him for guidance. So Mason gave it. We don't wait. We don't hide. We strike back. The plan was insane, risky, but Mason had led suicide missions before. This time, he had something more than soldiers at his side. He had believers. He had a family. He led a team of elite Tavari warriors into the lower belly of the Zarn cruiser. They moved through poison fog, dodged patrol drones, and scaled sheer cliffs of metal. Inside, they planted explosives at the drill's energy core. Mason was the last one out. He stared at the glowing engine for a full second before setting the timer. You wanted me gone, he said softly. I'm still here. He ran. The jungle shook as the drill exploded. A wave of blue fire burst from the earth. swallowing the Tsar machines, the rotten vines, and half the base's structure. It was not just an explosion. It was a message. Mason Cade was still fighting. Far above the battle. In deep space, Earth's forgotten fleet was waking up. Long ago, during the last phase of the war, a secret squad of Earth's finest ships had been cut off. In a failed warp jump, left drifting in subspace, they were presumed lost, dead, but they weren't. They were waiting, surviving. Their captain, an old warhawk named Colonel Alara Vance, received Mason's distress call. Sergeant Mason Cade, she repeated, last seen on Virix 9. That man was declared Kier 2 years ago. Her second-in-command replied, then I guess the reports were wrong. She smiled. Plot course, prepare for combat drop. Back on the planet, Mason could feel a shift in the wind. He knew the fight wasn't over. The Tsarn still had hundreds of soldiers, tanks, beasts, and drones. But something had changed. The Tavari were no longer afraid. They trained harder. They fought smarter. They called Mason by a new name now. Not God, not Flame, commander of the sky. And when he looked in their eyes, he didn't see worship. He saw respect. As days passed, Earth Command continued to send small upgrades. Fleet en route. ETA. 5 days. Hold ground. Weapons drop prepared. High orbit package landing soon. Enemy fleet detected. We're ready. And then came the one message that made Mason pause. We thought you were dead. Mason, Earth needs you now. More than ever. On the 4th night, as Mason sharpened his blade, he sat beside a young Davari boy named Linto, who had once hidden behind trees during battle, but now carried about taller than himself. Linto looked up and asked, will you go home when the skyships come? Mason didn't answer right away. He looked at the stars, then at the jungle, at the people, at the carved wooden necklace around his neck, a gift from the villagers. I don't know if I have a home anymore, Mason said softly, but maybe I can build one here. The stars changed. At first, the Davari thought it was just a trick of the night sky, another storm, maybe, or a firefly swarm dancing above the trees. But Mason Cade knew better. He stood on the highest peak near the edge of the jungle, staring up at the strange, silent lights now blinking in the heavens. They weren't natural. They weren't clouds. They were ships, hundreds of them. Some were long and silver, like swords made of starlight. Others were shaped like shields, broad and heavy. Glowing with power, Earth's flags flashed on their underbellies, and the blue and white colors of the forgotten fleet painted the sky like a promise. They came, Mason whispered, hardly believing it. They actually came, across the jungle. Davari gathered at the foot of the hill. They stared up with wide eyes, mouths open, in silent awe. Some dropped to their knees. Some cried. Others sang soft, trembling songs. To them, this was not just help. This was the sky itself answering Mason's call. And in that moment, something shifted in their hearts. They didn't just believe in him. They believed in themselves. But not far away, something else rose in the darkness, not in the sky, but from beneath the ground. The Tsarn Empire, facing defeat after defeat, had activated their final plan. They didn't just call for more soldiers. They summoned the buried armada, an ancient fleet hidden deep in the caves of Virix 9. Ships built in the first age of Tsarn war, banned for being too brutal, too unstable, too hungry. Skrulzik stood at the center of the awakening war machines, watching as the ground cracked and black ships emerged like fangs. His voice echoed across his command chamber. You want legends, human, he hissed. Then die in one. Within hours, the skies turned into a battlefield. Earth's fleet rained down drop pods carrying supplies, tanks, walkers, and elite soldiers. In the forest below, the Davari waited with spears, bows, and courage stronger than any metal. And at the center of both forces stood Mason Cade, armor dented, blade sharpened, standing between two worlds. He was not just a leader. He was the bridge. The Earth soldiers who landed were shocked when they met him. They expected a man hiding in the dirt, half crazy from isolation. But what they found was something else. He didn't salute. He didn't fall into formation. He stood tall, flanked by alien warriors who would die for him, who had already killed. For him, Colonel Alara Vance, leader of the Forgotten Fleet, stepped out of her dropship and removed her helmet. Her eyes widened. Cade, is that you? In the flesh, Mason said, giving her a tired smirk. Hope you brought more guns. The battle began at dawn. The Tsarn unleashed hell. The old war beasts, cybernetic monsters made of flesh, Wires and metal bones charged through the jungle like earthquakes. Skyfighters clashed above the trees, Earth's tanks fired from the cliffs. Drones lit up the sky with laser trails. Mason led the ground assault. Tavari warriors fought side by side with Earth soldiers, bow and plasma, blade and bullet. Roar and war cry. Everywhere Mason went, hope followed. He carried no flag. He was the flag. But war is never fair. A massive blast from a Zarn cruiser struck the Tavari village's edge. Buildings burned. Families screamed. The air filled with smoke and terror. Mason ran straight into the fire. He found a child trapped beneath a fallen beam, crying, shaking. Without thinking, Mason dropped his rifle, lifted the beam with bare hands, and pulled the child to safety. His armor cracked. His shoulders bled, but he didn't stop. Later, in the heart of the battle, Mason came face to face with Skrulzek. The Zarn general stood twice his height, covered in living armor that shifted like smoke. His voice rattled the bones. "You should not exist," Skrull said. "You were meant to die years ago." "I did," Mason replied coldly, "but they brought me back." Skrull laughed. "You think you're a hero, a god?" "No," Mason said, stepping forward. "I'm just the man who stayed." And then they fought. Steel clashed against claws. Fire met shadow. The forest trembled under the force of their battle. Trees split. Earth shook. Tavari and soldiers stopped and watched. From every direction. It wasn't just a fight. It was a story being written in blood and flame. Skrull roared and slammed Mason into the dirt. Mason gasped, ribs broken again, vision fading. Skrull raised his massive blade to end it. But then, a war horn sounded, and from the jungle came the Tavari charge, led by warriors young and old. Alara Vance appeared from the side with Earth mechs. The battle turned in a blink. Mason stood one last time, grabbed a broken Zarn spear, and drove it into Skrull's chest. "This is for every forgotten name," Skrull screamed, and fell. The battlefield went still. The Zarn saw their general fall, and they ran fled defeated. Mason collapsed to one knee. Tavari surrounded him. Soldiers saluted him, and from the hill, a single voice cried out, "The war is over." That night, the stars were peaceful again. Mason sat on a log near the fire, staring into the flames. He had wounds everywhere, but he smiled. He had one not with machines not with numbers but with heart, with fire, with the will to keep standing. Peace didn't feel real after so many battles, so much blood, and the constant weight of survival. The silence almost felt strange. Mason Cade sat beneath the giant glowing tree in the center of the Tavari village, its leaves shining like blue fireflies. Around him, children laughed, warriors rebuilt homes, and songs of victory echoed through the valley. The jungle was alive again. The war was over, but something inside Mason wasn't quiet yet. Colonel Alara Vance sat beside him, holding a small silver device, the kind Earth used to deliver orders. She didn't speak for a while, just stared out over the celebration. Finally, she cleared her throat. "You've been offered a hero's welcome," she said. "Earth wants you home, full honors. Highest medal we've ever given. We'll name a ship after you, Mason." He didn't look at her. He just kept watching the Tavari children play. "That's nice," he said softly, "but they don't need another statue. They need someone who stays." She nodded slowly. She understood. But then a Tavari scout came running into the clearing, out of breath, face pale. "Commander," the scout gasped, "there's something in the sky." "What kind of something?" Mason asked, standing up slowly. The scout pointed, and when Mason looked up, his heart froze. There, above the tree line, a shape moved silently across the stars. Not Zarn, not human, something else, smooth, silent, dark as space, but glowing with soft white lines like veins of light. Even Earth's fleet didn't detect it at first. It hovered, watched. Then it sent a signal, not in words, but in images, visions. Mason staggered back as the alien message entered his mind. He saw images of himself, not just as a soldier, but as a figure of legend, leading, protecting, rising. Then he saw a planet, Earth, surrounded by shadows, then the Tavari world, burning, then healing, then shining like a beacon. They were watching, Mason whispered. All this time, they were watching. The alien ship sent no troops, no weapons. Just a message. You are not forgotten. You are a story, a flame. What you did here will echo across stars. Then, just as silently, It vanished into the sky. Earth's command panicked. Alara received a dozen urgent calls. What was that ship? Should we send weapons? Is Cade secure? Mason just smiled. They weren't here to attack. They came to see a story end. Later that night, Mason stood at the edge of the jungle, holding a small return chip, a signal that would teleport him straight to Earth's high station. He stared at it for a long time. He could already imagine the speech, the news coverage, the cameras. But when he looked back at the Tavari village, at the soft light in their homes, the handmade necklace around his neck, the mural they painted of him on the wall holding a Tavari child, his decision became clear. He crushed the chip dot and dropped it into the dirt. Colonel Vance walked up behind him. You sure? Yeah, Mason said. I think this is where I was always meant to be. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. We'll tell them you stayed. We'll tell them the truth. We'll tell them you chose the stars over home. Weeks passed, then months. The jungle healed. The Tavari built schools, gardens, a great tower with carvings of their stories. At the top of that tower was a statue, not a god, not a soldier, but a man. Mason lived a simple life. After that, he helped fix water lines, taught Tavari kids to read and track and build. At night, he told stories of Earth, not of war, but of sunsets, rain, and peace. The people stopped calling him Flamey or Inger. They simply called him Father. And to the children born after the war, Mason Cade wasn't just a name. He was the reason they existed. Back on Earth, legends grew. Pilots painted his name on their ships. Children read about him in school. And deep in space, on far-off planets, whispers of a human who turned a jungle into a kingdom of hope spread like fire. Some say he died. Some say he became a god. But the Tavari knew the truth. He was just a man who stayed.